So this is a little video that I am doing because I wanted to ask a question of the YouTuber Paul Vanderklay, who does a lot of videos about philosophy and religion. And he has a weekly question and answer thing he does with his Discord. And I kept thinking about how I was going to phrase this question, how I was going to type it into Discord. And the more I thought about it, the more it just kind of ballooned in my mind. And I'm fashioning this a little bit after a fashion of how Paul has talked about some words in the past. Paul has a series called Words That Fudge, which is a great little exploration of how we use language in ways that we don't really recognize is complex and maybe deeper than we are expecting it to be. And the word that fudges that I want to talk about today is heaven or heavens. And I have questions about heaven. Now before we get into any further, I feel like I have to start off right on the bat and say, this is not a question about the place that good people go when they die. I want to cover a lot of range of how this word is used, but when you say heaven, to most people, they're thinking of, okay, you know, the New Jerusalem in Revelation, streets of gold, there's angels flying around, maybe they've got an idea of a throne somewhere, and all that's biblical language. But it's so weirdly tangled up with all of the rest of the stuff that I want to talk about that it's not going to be a useful part of this discussion to go into. So we're not going to be talking about that heaven at all really in depth. That's not what I want to know about, because that heaven will take care of itself. But in the realm of philosophy and thinking about how thought and the spiritual and all of these things interact, that is where I want to dig in and try to express some confusion that I have, some questions that I have, and maybe sort of elucidate where I've been able to think so far. And there's a possibility Paul will see this. I hope that he does, and maybe he can help me out and tell me where I'm going wrong or right, or what I'm thinking. But to start with, let's get with the easy stuff, okay? The easy heaven that we can all deal with, that everybody is basically cool with, is the visible stars, right? So we look up, we see stars in the sky. There's Mars and Jupiter as the planets. All right, the ancients would have thought about them as also stars, but they're stars that moved around, and there's the fixed stars. So the fixed stars are less cool, but they're still important, and then some of them are grouped together into constellations, and those are more important. And then you have your movable guys, and you're like, well, I don't know what's going on with those. They must be special, and those are, you know, planets. We know this now. We don't think about them in the way the ancients thought of them, and that's going to be part of where this digression is going. But we can all understand that we look up, we see lights in the sky. Unfortunately, less now for a lot of us in places where there are many man-made lights. But we see lights up in the heavens, right? The heaven. I don't, that's a whole nother, maybe I'll get to asking questions about that and digging into what that distinction is. But great. I think everybody, even materialists and people who don't want to think about spiritual stuff at all, can get on board with the fact that up there, there's stars, all right? And we can look up and we can see them. And current scientific understanding is that they are basically like the sun, fusion-fueled explosions. That's a fudge as well, but, you know, we were seeing light from these explosions. They come from us from very far away, and the planets are things that orbit the sun, but we see their light as a point of light, just like the rest of the stars. Okay, so we've got the visible and, to some extent, the physical heavens. when they got to be physical, maybe we can get to that later, but the visible heavens, everybody's cool with. The second level that I want to get to is, I think, also largely unproblematic, which is part of the problem, paradoxically. But the reason that I'm asking these questions and thinking about these things is because one of the ways that Paul Vanderklay uses the word heaven or heavens or heavenlies is to speak of the realm of thought, right? The realm of the intellect, the place where the plan comes down from and can be instantiated into the world. This is best elucidated in the book The Language of Creation by Mathieu Pajot. If you're a PVK Paul Vanderklay viewer, you'll know about this. If you're not, I mean, you can go look it up. But the one of the very first things that Mathieu Pajot does is he starts talking about this idea of heaven and earth. And heaven is, in his formulation, and again, because all of these are exploded into all this different stuff, I'm not trying to reduce heaven to this or say this is the correct way to understand it, but this is a way to understand it. Heaven is like the plan. So, that may sound too grand. We're gonna condense it down a little bit. Heaven is the blueprint, and earth is the building. So in Mathieu Pajot's conception, heaven comes down, right? The plan for how the matter will be organized, the pattern of the matter is above the matter, but it organizes the matter in the same way that the thoughts organize the actions of the body. Okay. This is very Aristotelian. In my understanding of Aristotle, please correct me if I'm wrong, but Aristotle puts this forth as a kind of way of understanding the world, right? He says up in the heavenlies are the gods and the thoughts and the ideas, and the gods are perfect, which is something we need to circle back to. But the gods are these perfect Platonic forms. He's a very important, student of Plato. So he's equating the heavens with these Platonic forms in a similar way, I think, that to how Mathieu Pajot does. And then these forms come down and are informed into earth. All right. So let's bring the Bible in a little bit, because this is where sort of my interest is most rooted, because I'm coming at this from a Christian perspective. You have Genesis. Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I got to read it to my little boy today, because I came in from outside in the early morning and he said, Daddy, read the Bible. And I'm like, where? He's like, chapter 1. He has no idea what chapter 1 is. He's 3, but I'm like, sure, chapter 1's a banger, man. We'll put on chapter 1. So we read Genesis chapter 1, and, kicks off. There it is, heaven and earth. Now, in that context, in the context we've already established, you can fudge that heaven around a lot of different ways. Because in the creation story, there is obviously a sense that God creates stars and planets and moon and sun, right? All of that stuff is part of God's creation. It's mentioned separately. It's mentioned in different days. But day 1 is God creates heaven and earth. Now, if we're going from a Pajotian interpretation perspective, this means that at the beginning, God creates meaning and matter, all right? And then, like, the later days of creation elucidate more what is going on with that and how the creation is let's say, more finely tuned, right? We get to light and dark, and we get to, all the specifics of the land and the sea, and then the sea is commanded to bring forth animals, and the land is also the same, right? So you have all of these things that kind of come down in this pyramid. But then God also creates the firmament in the midst of the heavens. And when God creates the firmament in the midst of the heavens, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, what? And then there's water up there, and you're looking at, I got a person walking up beside me. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if they're going to talk to me. They're going to walk by. That's cool. Anyway, you got water up there. Now wait a minute. Let's back up a second. All of a sudden, these heavenlies, right? The idea, the realm of ideas and the realm of earth is suddenly a place where there's water, and it's got a sun up in there. And here's where things start to just explode. And Peugeot talks about this in the book, right? Because for Aristotle, the heavens are perfect. They have to be perfect because Aristotle has made the heavens the realm of the intellect, right? In the realm of the perfect, ageless forms. He's doing a Platonic thing. He's a Platonist to a degree. He has his quibbles with Plato, but he's very much indebted to Plato, and he's working off of sort of his notes. And so he's thinking about these forms, and he's like, okay, well, there's these perfect forms. They're up in the heavens. I can look up into the stars. I see that there is this seemingly amazing pattern. And the thing is, Aristotle's not just a Platonist, all right? Aristotle's also in a tradition, a very, very long tradition of understanding the heavens as the world of the spiritual. All right, now we're getting into stuff that's going to make people really uncomfortable because, Paul already did a video called Words That Fudge about spiritual. So, but I mean, it doesn't have to fudge that much, because for the ancient people, those are the gods. All right? The sun is a god. The moon is a goddess. The various planets are various gods. The constellations represent heavenly entities connected with different spirits and stuff. And you can even see this in certain biblical text if you want to read it that way. The probably the most notable one is when Joshua tells the sun to stand still. That only makes sense if the sun is a person, guys. Because he doesn't pray. He doesn't go and say, "Dear Lord, please make the sun stand still. Amen." He says, "Sun, stand still. And moon, you stand still over in this valley over here." So he's got a conversation going on with the gods, because he's working for the bigger god. That's what's going on in that passage, in my opinion. That Joshua says to the lower gods of the sun and the moon, pause. And they do, because they are subject to the larger god. But so Aristotle's in this tradition of the gods are represented in the heavens, live in the heavens. Again, here we go with our explosion, because we've split these two things apart. In the before times, when you looked up and you saw the planet Venus, which is one of the, even when you've got quite a bit of light pollution, Venus is one of the brightest things, so you can still see her. When you saw the planet Venus, that was the goddess Venus. Now, the statue that was in the temple that you might have had to Venus or Aphrodite was also Venus and Aphrodite. And she was both places because she was a god and she could do that, a goddess, right? So there wasn't like this sense that there was a problem with this bilocation. Or for instance, Venus might even embody somebody, right? Right, you know, Zeus comes down and takes all kinds of different forms. He doesn't stop being the planet Jupiter. I think Zeus is associated with Jupiter. I get me on my classical mythology if I'm wrong. Zeus doesn't stop being Jupiter to come down and do his shenanigans on Earth. But we run into a problem when we get to Plato and Aristotle. Because Plato looks at the gods, Socrates in Plato. I don't know if this is a Socrates idea that Plato just continues forward, or if this is an idea that Plato puts in Socrates' mouth. You cannot distinguish the two of these from each other, so I don't know. But Socrates in the dialogues says, look at those gods. Those gods suck. They're going around like raping people and murdering, and they have all these like petty squabbles between themselves. What we're gonna do, guys, I have this plan. We're gonna make the gods an allegory. The gods are allegories for like the physical, not the physical, I'm sorry, but like the world of the forms and the way that sort of psychologically things are happening. Plato wouldn't have had a word for psychology, but that's basically what he takes these gods and turns them into an allegory and psychologizes them. Because the gods were pretty nasty, right? The god, you know, if you go back in Old Testament-y times, you've got Molech and you know, who's the fish dude? I'm blanking on it right now. Dagon, right? The fish god. You have all of these sort of very earthy beings, you know, and Genesis 6 talks about them coming down, and they're, you know, just like in the Greek myths, right? They come down, they have sex with all these human women, and they have these offspring, and they're, you know, Supermans, right? Giants or strong dudes or men of renown or whatever. And Plato looks at that and he's like, we can't have gods like this. This is not cool. We should stop talking about the gods. Which, by the way, is one of those things where if you look at Plato and you read what he said, Socrates, it's so difficult to split between them. But you look at what Socrates is said to have said by Plato, and then you look at his charge of impiety and you think, well, yeah, he was kind of impious. I mean, he's trying to change their entire religion and tell people to stop talking about the gods in his perfect city because the gods are kind of nasty. But so Aristotle is taking this psychologized, neutered, sterilized idea of the gods and saying those go up into the heavens, okay? The gods are perfect. All the stories about them from before are limited and problematic. So we've cleaned them up, we've turned them into psychological principles, all right? And now we're going to go put them up in the heavens and say that the heavens are these spheres, right? Spheres are perfect, right? Everything's got to run on circles, and the fact that the planets don't run on circles is a real problem. So we got to put a bunch of circles in there to make the planets run. That was a major project for a long time for astrology, was just like mapping out the motion of the planets in the sky, because they zigzag back and forth based on how the Earth moves and how they're moving. Mapping out that motion with only circles, because circles are perfect and the planets are perfect. Now, at a certain point, Galileo comes with his telescope and hammers the entire conception that Aristotle had set up to pieces. All right, he looks up, he sees things orbiting around Jupiter. He's like, wait a minute, there's stuff going around up there. There's no way there's a sphere that Jupiter is embedded in, because then there would, like, how would the spheres of its little planets go around it? And I am not a student of philosophical history. There's a lot of blame that gets put on the church for dunking hard on Plato about, not Plato, Galileo, right? That Galileo looks up, he sees all this stuff. The church is like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. Why does the church do this? there are things in the Bible that are sort of embedded in a classical sense of, it talks about the sun rising and setting. So if you're doing a heliocentric thing and you're saying that's really the way it is, there is an argument to be made that, well, if you're going to be 100% biblical literalist, you can't have what Galileo is doing. But I think the real reason the church hates this so much is that by the time Galileo comes along, Aristotelianism and Christianity had basically merged. Now, there's stuff in Aristotle that gets scrubbed out to make it palatable for Christianity. Everybody is not completely Aristotelian, but Aristotle's model, right? His idea of the heavens as a perfect representation of what the gods are doing, and Aristotle's putting those scare quotes in because he's like, we don't got like Zeus coming down and raping people anymore. That's like something else. I don't know actually how they analogized. Anyway, I don't know how they did that exactly, but they made it into a story, and Philo of Alexandria does this even with the Book of Genesis, which is great, where he's like, look, it's not really trees, you guys. Philo's fun to read. He's got some good insights, but he wants to turn everything into just this amazing, like, completely convoluted allegory. And there's value to reading it, but it's also like, come on, man. Moses wasn't a Platonist. Maybe Plato got a few things right that Moses had. And I understand that the pattern of creation is the pattern of everything. So in a sense, like, some of your stuff is fair to look into and find these patterns, but also you go too far. But Philo does this with the creation where he's like, that didn't like really happen. It's just a bunch of ideas. Aristotle has done that thing. The gods didn't really happen. They're just a bunch of ideas. And so now we have everything perfect because everything's ideas. The realm of the heavenly is the realm of the intellect. And these perfect forms, right, that Plato and Socrates had kind of worked up. Who knows if Socrates helped? But definitely Plato has been understood to be condoning this idea of the forms. So the forms have to be perfect, and the forms are like the gods. The gods are like the forms. Here they are in their perfect, unchanging state. Good, we have everything. And then, so like I said, Galileo comes along with his telescope and smashes it all to pieces. Gone are the celestial spheres. Gone shortly after that are the perfect circles. Now we've got ellipses, and there's like, oh, what are you doing, Aristotle? Why? Aristotle gets thoroughly trashed. And I have to now do the Christian thing, and the Protestant Christian thing, go to some sola scriptura here and say, like, wait a minute. So what? And Paul and I, like you and Jonathan Peugeot, not Jonathan. Well, Jonathan, I'm sure too, but Mathieu Peugeot in his book, we're going to these ideas of the heavenlies as the realm, the unchanging realm. And I've heard Paul use those words specifically. Here's the unchanging, timeless, perfect realm, which is going to be reflected down into earth. But clearly not. All right, and so the physical heavens got smushed, and we thought, okay, we're gonna split it apart, right? No more astrology. And I haven't talked about astrology yet, but it's important to remember that the reason astrology happened was because those planets up there were the gods. And so when the gods are doing stuff in the heavens, they're also doing stuff down here on earth. The heavens and the earth reflect each other, right? The actions of those gods is breathed down into the physical, the world here on earth, right? The planet Earth, for people who are now stuck in a modern frame. They wouldn't have thought about that way. There's probably, some kind of a dome, but whatever, right? Like, what's up here impacts what's down here. That's why astrology works. So they're doing astrology, figuring stuff out. And now Plato says, well, the heavens aren't actually as perfect as we thought they were. There's not these glass spheres or crystal spheres or whatever they are that have the planets embedded in them that are going around. What are we going to do about this? And the break that produces modernity is the idea that, okay, we didn't, like, those physical heavens are now different than the spiritual world. Because we had to hold on to Aristotle. Now, I said I was going to go to the Bible, and I didn't yet. I got run on a rabbit trail about astrology and stuff. But the reason I want to go back to the Bible is because I think the problem that I have, and the problem with this language of heaven and earth, is that it's very much confused within Scripture itself, even. As a person who reads of the gods in Scripture, and even you can look at what Plato had about the gods, you could say, no. Those are not like timeless, perfect, unchanging forms. They're a bunch of douchebag spirits. Okay? They're fallen angels. Like, nobody in the time that the scriptures were produced, at least the time, the early, like the Old Testament stuff, would have thought of Dagon as a principle, right? Dagon's a person, okay? Dagon's a guy, not a man. You know what I'm saying? Like, he's a non-bodily person. Molech is a person. I say non-bodily. They have bodies. They're not human bodies, right? They're like the bodies of the planets and stuff, right? Ra, the sun god, is a person. He has a personality. You can speak to him. He will respond if you have enough authority. And so what we lost that sense because we took up Aristotle. And yet the Aristotelian sense of the spiritual and the heavenlies is not absent from the Bible. So, for instance, Christ's Lord's Prayer, and it says to pray, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, as in earth as it is in heaven. What does that mean? That seems to be a perfect, timeless realm where God's ultimate plan is playing out. But it, like, we on earth are rebellious to a degree, and so we have to submit ourselves to that plan. And there's also even, like, there's tons of different ways to see that. I actually really like the King James translation on the Lord's Prayer in that particular case, because it's actually a little bit, you could argue that it's wrong. The word for in, translated in earth and in heaven, are different original Greek words, but because we live in a modern materialist sort of cosmos, if you say on earth, well, now you're thinking about the planet Earth. But as we saw from Plato, there is other matter in the universe, and God's will is done in that as well. There is other earth, other stuff. And so God's will, we pray, to be done in the matter of the world, and also in the earth of our, right? We are made of earth. A lot of ways to understand that. That really does seem to be a purer sense of heaven. But then that same Jesus, all right, says, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. And unless you thought that was a one-off or a fluke, Peter talks about that the heavens will be folded up as a garment, all right, put away. The heavens are going to change. And then you have other language like in Psalm 68, where it talks about God riding on the heavens of heavens. Now we've got more than one heaven. We've got lots and lots of heavens, and there's too many heavens. There's too much and too many heavens. And like I said, we're not even going to talk about the heaven that you hope to go to when you die, okay? Which maybe is one of these heavens, right? If we're saying that one of the highest heavens is the realm of God, that we commune with him, okay, like in a sort of abstract sense, yes. But how that relates to the New Jerusalem and Revelation and all that is difficult for me to understand. That's heaven coming down into earth. Again, that's heaven embodied into the world, into the new heavens and the new earth. And I don't even know exactly how to frame this as a final question, but all of these heavens overlap to a degree. Like, we look up and we see the stars and they're imperfect. And that was a problem for the Aristotelian view of the universe. It's not necessarily a problem for the biblical view of the universe, because we know that as we look up at the stars and find them to be imperfect as we examine them closer, the gods that people followed before the sort of dominion of Christ were also horribly imperfect, right? And that's why, by the way, if Christian, there's a sidebar, that's why we don't do astrology if you're a Christian, because you don't serve those gods. Those gods do not rule your life anymore. All right? If you worship Jupiter and you claim him as the ruler of your life, then you should look up and see what he's doing up there, because he's going to have some influence. That's not my God, and that's why astrology doesn't work. But we're still left with all of it, so many tangles of loose ends. So you've got the gods as imperfect, and you really do see the ancient church fathers trying to work through this, because they develop these ideas of angels and demons in a Aristotelian-ish framework, where they're the passions and they are the these, they can't figure out how they fall, right? They look up at the angels and they say, okay, we're gonna assume this Aristotelian perfection, unchangeability, but then also the angels are evil. God doesn't create people evil, so there's evil angels, but God didn't create them, so they must have fallen like immediately after the final creation. They must have been okay, and then boop, they fell, and immediate, in a non-timeless sense, God creates them before, in eternity, before time starts, and before, but after, but not after. Then, and you get into this, I don't want to say it's nonsense, because I'm not as smart as those guys, so I don't, but you really do tie yourself to knots trying to reconcile the Aristotelian worldview and the biblical worldview. And yet, in a sense, the Aristotelian worldview is not separate from the biblical worldview. Aristotle's before Jesus, right? He's before Paul. A lot of these philosophical ideas are making it into the Bible itself as the New Testament happens. And I guess my question is what do we mean when we say heaven? What is that about? I have some intimations, but I would really appreciate the thoughts of people smarter than me. Thank you for your time and attention. I don't know if I'll do any more of these. I'll probably just upload this on the channel where my family's videos go, and maybe Paul will see it. I don't know if anybody else will see it, but I would appreciate if you do see it and you have some thoughts and you want to tell me where I was wrong or how I can think differently or better. let me know.